So the protests nationwide over the Ferguson grand jury's decision not to indict. National Review editor Rich Lowry causing a stir with comments he made on NBC's Meet the Press. Take a look.
What I really object to is you can discuss all these problems, but let's not pretend that this particular incident was something it wasn't. If you look at the most credible evidence, the lessons are really basic. Don't rob a convenience store. Don't fight a policeman when he stops you and try to take his gun. And when he yells at you to stop with his gun drawn, just stop. And none of this would happen.
Well, the panel got really outraged at Rich over those comments. Joining us now, Alan Colmes, host of The Alan Colmes Show. Also, radio talk show host Tammy Bruce. Welcome to both of you. So
hello.
Let's talk about the way this has been covered in the media. Tammy, you say that this is, well, the op-ed piece that you wrote suggests for President Obama and his cronies, everything is political and everything and everyone is a pawn. You think they're taking advantage of the situation?
Well, look, there is a foundational issue here that is not even about race relations. It's about poverty. It's about generations of young men and families, like Michael Brown's family, that really have had no hope. And since the president was elected, of course, we've had unemployment rates even are worse for communities of color. You've got, in some districts here in this country, you've got over a 50% unemployment rate for young black men. In Missouri, at least nationwide, it's 36% for young black men. So this kind of imagery keeps people from asking, I think, directly, why have our lives not gotten better? Why is the condition of our communities not well? And I think that this really does help facilitate a distraction from what the real issue is.
You've had a lot of arguments, Alan, with Rich Lowry when we've had you together for this particular
and even with Tammy.
What does he have wrong in that Meet the Press?
I think what he's ignoring is the historical context here, that FBI statistics show that a black youth is 21 times more likely to be shot by a police officer, by a white police officer, than a white is. And that, yes, I think poverty is certainly a common denominator and is an issue, but you can't ignore the race issue here. And this was a flashpoint. This was like, we've had enough.
But
what happened in Ferguson.
In the moments leading up to that shooting, nobody's thinking about history. It's just one cop and one kid.
I'm talking about the reaction to it. Why you have football players coming on the field. Why you doing what they did.
Right.
Why you have protests. Because this has been enough.
But doing what they did, the hands up, don't shoot, there's no evidence, Tammy, that happened.
Well, look, and even leading up to this, the reason this is happening in part, I think, is driven by how the media has been covering it. When you're a network like Fox, which is the #1 network, you have a lot more of a flexibility in looking at all the details. When you've got a network like CNN or MSNBC that are reliant on extraordinary news.
MSNBC, who employs Al Sharpton as an on-air host.
You know, they begin to need these kinds of images and this kind of existential threat dynamic. Discussions about poverty isn't as exciting or threatening to the average viewer. But let me just say, though, that when you're looking at the nature of what's happening here and what the president said, what Eric Holder, as the attorney general, has been saying, Alan, in the month leading up to this, comparing Mike Brown to Emmett Till on the news, the president saying the police have to learn not to distinguish between who's a criminal and who isn't.
They do.
But the issue is that never addressing what their policies have done to those communities and wanting communities of color to believe that this is an existential
I think
threat
we're missing
on
something
race,
here. David Brooks was right when he said white people have to understand the black experience with cops. He said that there is some institutional racism. In terms of Al Sharpton, by the way, John, why is it not okay for him to show up, or Jesse Jackson, but the Oath Keepers were there with guns on rooftops being asked by police to disarm and not do that anymore? You know, it's not one-sided. You have armed militia people showing up, which is not helping the situation.
But when it comes to the media coverage, I mean, so much of this was fanned, by people telling stories about how Michael Brown was shot in the back by a police officer while he was trying to surrender. The autopsy report, there's no evidence. I mean, none of that is supported by the evidence.
I think there's a lot of feeling in the African-American community that for closure, that at least could have been a trial where all the evidence was put on the table rather than what is a much more closed-door grand jury investigation, and that would have brought more closure to the community.
Well, Rich Lowry also wrote that if Michael Brown had perhaps run away from the cop car and kept running, or if he had surrendered, he would be alive today.
Well, we can all surmise what may or may not have happened. A moment occurred, and a man in a grand jury agreed, felt that he was under imminent threat of death, and he acted. What the media has done, though, is because it's not as interesting to cover issues of poverty or the environment of that situation, is that they've moved with one kind of line. And you saw with Andrea Mitchell's face in that clip that you first played when Lowry was talking, was the shock that he was even mentioning facts, that the evidence kind of disturbed her because, look, I think maybe it's more exciting to talk about emotions, but nothing's going to change, John, unless we get down to the foundational issue that's affected that community. And frankly, and President Obama is going out to do more meetings today, the foundational issue is not about race relations. The foundational issue is about poverty that has been perpetuated by people like President Obama over the last 6 years.
When you talk about the unemployment rate, which has improved from 10.2% to 5.8%
not for
over
the black
last
community,
3 years,
not for the
a
black
rising
community.
tide lifts all boats. You can't separate and say, well, the black community hasn't seen any benefit from the rising unemployment rate.
Interestingly enough, they haven't, and those rates are because of part-time jobs and also because more people have fallen out of the workforce.
There are more people working, and more people now over the last couple of months are actually back looking for work, and not everything is Obama's fault. You just can't blame him for everything.
There is video of Michael Brown committing this strong-arm robbery, taking the cigarillos from that store, right?
Right.
So does a kid like that deserve to be compared with Emmett
Till? How about the fact that the prosecutor... No, the answer is no. But how about the fact that the prosecutor leaked that information, put that out there, maybe tainted and poisoned the pool, the jury pool, by saying, look what this guy also did. That does not mean he should have been shot to death.
But if he's struggling for an officer's gun?
Right. But the fact is the prosecutor seemed... Then putting out that video showing that, look how bad a guy this is that giving you an opportunity for a fair and balanced jury? I say no.
Well, but does it in some ways counteract the stories that were in the press about how Michael Brown was shot?
Why put out information that's not related to the incident at hand and taint a jury pool?
Alan, when the grand jury was still seated is when President Obama was making his remarks, when the Sunday before it came out, when Eric Holder made his comments about Emmett Till, that you know that that was effectively to some degree meant to influence the grand jury. That's not fair either.
Michael Brown is not a hero. And those people, by the way, who are misbehaving and looting, they're not doing anything good in the name of racial justice in this country. But you can't ignore the race element here based on the statistics of the way black youth are treated by white guys.
But if Michael Brown disobeyed a police order and then...
That doesn't mean he should be shot.
And then punched a cop.
That doesn't mean...
And then tried to grab his gun. I mean,
there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way. And by the way, there's still a lot of dissension in terms of what actually happened, according to disparate testimony in the grand jury. But that's why there's a feeling in the community that at least an indictment and a fair trial would have brought closure to this.
Closure, this is not about mob justice. This is about, we've got to get into the point of evidence, what actually really happened, and the media's important role of making that clear as well. And these days we don't have that so much. Online we have a little bit more of it, but when it comes to television, with the exception perhaps of Fox News and print like the Washington Times, is we don't have a lot of balanced points of view when it comes to what's really occurred.
Washington Times is balanced?
Yeah, well, now that I'm a columnist there, yes.
I guess now it's balanced.
Yes,
okay.
it is.
Congratulations.
Absolutely.
Even Missouri's governor, a former prosecutor, promised that the cop was going to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law before anybody knew what happened. There were a lot of people jumping on this train way too early. That's my thought. And, the media didn't help.
Yeah. You're pointing at me when you say media for some reason.
No, I'm pointing at all of us.
Look, he's on the right today. We got to give thanks for something.
But that's only stage right.
All right.
Alan Colmes, Tammy Bruce, thank you both.